Hello everyone, my name is Leah and welcome back to my channel.
Hello friends, this is Editing Leah here to say that my makeshift tripod that I had made was in the corner of the screen the whole time that I was filming pretty much. So I'm sorry about that. That's what that is. But I'm not refilming that entire video, so I'm sorry. That's just going to be in the corner of the frame the whole time.
Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of July. Am I filming this in September? Yes. I got behind on my wrap-ups. I'm sorry. This is where we are. And I'm even filming this like a third of the way into September, so it's not even the beginning of September, but this is where we're at. First, to start out with some stats, in the month of July I read 22 books, 14 of those were audiobooks and 2 of them were graphic novels. Of the 20 books that were not graphic novels, I read 2 nonfiction books, 1 adult book that was kind of like a historical or like literary fiction, 8 contemporary. Of those 8 contemporary, 3 were adult and there were 5 YA, 1 that also had some thriller aspects to it. I read 1 thriller. I read 6 YA fantasy books, and I think 1 of those fantasy books also had historical fiction aspects to it, if not 2 of the books. It might have been 2 of the books. And then 1 middle grade and 1 adult sci-fi. So I read a really big variety of genres and ages this month. For my star ratings, I gave 4 books 5 stars, 9 books 4 stars, 7 books 3 stars, and 2 books got no rating. For those no rating books, they were 2 nonfiction books that I read. I tend to have a hard time figuring out how to rate nonfiction, so I kind of end up not really giving it a rating. But I'm very happy with the fact that I did not have any books that were 1 or 2 stars this month, and I haven't actually had any recently. I definitely had a couple closer to the beginning of the year, but I've started DNFing more, and that's something I kind of started doing at the end of last year, and I'm really seeing how that's leading to me reading more books that I enjoy. The first book that I read in July was Monday's Not Coming by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is a YA contemporary that I would also say has some thriller elements. I buddy read this with my friend RC, and before I say anything else, I do want to mention that there's definitely some trigger warnings for this book, and I'll be listing any of those in the description box down below, and I'll definitely do that for any other books that have trigger warnings. And I'll try to be comprehensive, but if you're someone who needs trigger warnings, definitely look down at the description box. But also, I may miss some, so definitely look up to see what other reviewers have said also. This follows a high school girl named Claudia, and she goes back to school, and her friend Monday is nowhere to be found, and no one seems to be worried about her. No one is really looking for her, and Claudia is really concerned. And this book follows her trying to figure out what's happened to her friend, and also it's about her and Monday's friendship. This was so good. I read this on audio and I loved the audiobook so much, but I also really wanted to reread this physically. I'm not sure when I'll do that, maybe in October or November, because I really want to do it this year. This is just so good, and I need to reread it because there are some things that I just want to reread the book knowing, and also see what the book looks like physically and how it reads physically. I buddy read this with my friend RC and we both cried. This book is definitely very, very good, but it's also very hard to read at times, so definitely know that going into it. And both of us reading this and crying over it convinced our friend Reagan to read it, and she's actually the one that sent me this physical copy, so thank you, Reagan. This was 5 stars. It's so good. Please read this. The next book that I read was So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijoma Aluo. This is a nonfiction book, and I also read this via audiobook. I tend to have a hard time with nonfiction, but I've found recently that I find it much easier to get through via audio. So if you have any good nonfiction audiobook recommendations, let me know, because I'm definitely interested in that. I want to try reading more nonfiction, and I think audiobook is going to be the way for me to do that. This book is about race in America and the author's own experiences in America and with race, and also how to talk to people about race and have conversations about racial issues. I thought this was a really informative read. Some of the things I already knew, but I definitely did learn some things, and I think this is a book that I will want to revisit in the future, probably via audiobook again. The next thing that I read was another audiobook. Can you see the direction that this video is going? I think I mentioned I read 14 audiobooks. So over half of the books that I read this month were audiobooks. And that was King and the Dragonflies by Case and Callender. Case and Callender also wrote Felix Ever After, which I read, I think, in June, and I really liked that, and I wanted to try some of Casen's other works. This is a middle grade about a 12-year-old boy who is dealing with the death of his brother. It's about grief, and it's about King's relationship with his brother, and also his relationship with his best friend Sandy. And it's also about King figuring out his sexuality. This book touches on the intersection of Black and queer identities, which is something that Felix Ever After also did. And I'm just so happy that this middle grade book exists for kids to read, because I can't even imagine like what this could have done for me as a middle schooler. To read a book like this, I think, could honestly be life-changing for some younger kids, and I'm just so glad that this book exists and it's for younger readers. I really enjoyed this book, and I liked the audiobook, and I gave it 4 stars. The next thing that I read was Her Royal Highness by Rachel Hawkins, and this was a buddy read with Katie from Brightness Katie Reads, and I'll link the channels and information for any of the people that I mentioned down in the description box below. This book is a YA contemporary, and it follows a girl named Millie who goes off to school in Scotland, and her roommate turns out to be this stuck-up princess named Flora. I really wanted to read this, especially because I've seen it pitched as a YA sapphic red, white, and royal blue, and I love red, white, and royal blue, and I love sapphic books. So I was really excited to read this, especially because red, white, and royal blue was a 5-star read for me, but I thought this book was just alright. It was sapphic and it was cute, but I really just wanted more relationship and character development from it, and I didn't really get that. And I've also heard that the depiction of Scotland is not accurate at all, so bear that in mind. I did enjoy it, and if you're looking for a light and fluffy sapphic read, I'd say go for it, and I gave this 3 stars. The next thing that I read was Lady Midnight by Cassandra Clare, which is the first book in the Dark Artifices series by her, and I actually have read this before. This was a reread, and I actually reread it via audio, and I reread it so I could finally read Lord of Shadows, which I started in July, and I have not finished it. That's a buddy read with my friend Reagan. We're going to get through it eventually. The next thing that I read was Graceling by Kristen Kishore. This is a YA fantasy, and I think I read this like a long time ago, and I didn't enjoy it that much. I think I gave it 3 stars, but I'm so glad I decided to read it, and a couple of my friends had told me that they really liked it and I should read it, so I decided to give it a second chance, and I'm so glad I did because I really enjoyed it. I also thought the pacing really picked up in the second half. That isn't to say I hated the pacing in the first half, but I really enjoyed the pacing in the second half. In this world, people are graced with different abilities, and the main character, Katza, is graced with killing, and she works for the king, who is her uncle. She ends up meeting a prince from another kingdom who is also graced, and they end up going on some adventures that will affect all the 7 kingdoms in the book. Something I want to mention about this book is that I read a bunch of reviews after reading it, and people in reviews really seem to think that Katza is very much a not like other girls protagonist because she doesn't want to marry and have kids. However, when I read it, it personally didn't come across that way for me, and her reasons for not wanting to marry and have kids are explored in the book, so I don't think she really came across that way. Some people just don't want to have kids, and I think that the author was just portraying one type of female character. I also read the second book in the series in July, which I'll talk about next, and that main character does want to get married, so especially in the context of the series, I really think that this author is just exploring different types of women and what different women want. Reviews also seem to not like Katza because she's abrasive, but I think that again, there's good character reason for that, so it didn't really bother me personally. Though I guess if you don't like abrasive female characters, this probably won't be the book for you. But I really enjoyed this book, and I gave it 4 stars. So the next book in the Graceling trilogy is Fire, which I read next. And something about this I really liked is I felt like you could tell that Kristen Kishore's writing had evolved in it. I liked it even more. I liked the writing more. This book just really took me in and sucked me in, and I got so absorbed in it. I think I stayed up until 5 or 6 a.m. finishing this book because it just completely absorbed me, and I love when a book just reminds me of my love for reading, just completely absorbs me and gets me invested in it, and that's what this book did. I would say the first half of this book was probably like a 4-star read for me, and then it really picked up in the second half and turned into a 5-star read for me, and I really enjoyed it. So while the books in this trilogy, except now I think there's going to be a sequel book, so is it a trilogy anymore? But while this takes place in the same world and there's a character from Graceling that you see in it, this follows a completely different character and it takes place in a different part of the world, and it actually takes place years before Graceling. It's also interesting because while a big part of the first book was about graces, this book doesn't talk about graces at all. This book takes place in a different part of the world where graces aren't really a thing. In this other part of the world, there are monsters, and the main character, Fire, is actually a monster. I think she's half human, half monster, and so she's like a human monster. I think she's the last human monster in existence. She can actually control people's minds, but she really doesn't want to use that power because of how she has seen how it can turn people kind of bad, and she doesn't want to become the horrible monster that her father was. So her powers are also a little bit more than that. Even without realizing, she can influence the minds of other people, so it was really interesting to focus on all of that. I loved this book. I loved Fire, the main character, and I loved how different she was from Katza, the main character of Graceling. One thing I also really like about both of these books, I think Kristen Cashor's writing in general, is that this is a YA fantasy series that depicts sex in a positive way and actually talks about birth control and things like that, which I saw a bunch of reviews complaining about, but that was one thing I really like about this series. So I really enjoyed this book, and I gave it 5 stars. The next book that I read was Radio Silence by Alice Oseman, and I love this book so much. I've been meaning to read it for a while, and I buddy read this with 2 of my friends, Laurel and Aaron, and we all loved it so much. We all gave it 5 stars, and we all flew through it. It was so good. This is a YA contemporary about a girl named Frances who draws fan art for this podcast called Radio Silence, and she doesn't really tell anyone about this fan art, and she's also very focused on school and doing well, and that's a really big part of what this book explores. This book also focuses on her friendship with another student named Aled, and one thing I love about this book is that the 2 main characters are a girl and a guy, but there is never a romance between them. It's just friendship, and I love that focus on their friendship. And also both of them are queer. It's so good. Frances is bisexual and Aled is on the ace spectrum, and with both of those, this book just meant so much to me, and I loved it so much. I want to read this again sometime soon and tab up this physical copy that I got because I actually read it via an ebook that I borrowed from the library. Also, this is one of Chanel's favorite books, and she recently read this for her Crusty Club book club, and she did a live show for that, so if you want to check that out, I'm going to leave that linked in the comments. The next thing that I read was An Unkindness of Ghosts by Rivers Solomon. I read this on audio, and I really want to reread this physically because sometimes with audiobooks I have a problem where I'll space out and miss something, and I feel like I might have missed a couple things listening to this audiobook, and it's a little denser, and I feel like I'll get more out of it if I read the physical copy. This is a sci-fi following the main character Aster, who lives on the lower decks of a space vessel called the Matilda, I think, the HSS Matilda. It deals with trauma, gender, race, classism, sexuality, so many different things. And it's definitely a difficult read at times, but it was so good. And like I said, I really want to reread this physically at some point. The next book that I read was Lair of Dreams by Libba Bray. This was, like Lady Midnight, a reread so I could finally read the next book in the series, which I'm still in the middle of. Have not finished it yet. But I read this on audio, I really enjoyed it, I gave it 4 stars. If you don't know, this is the second book in the Diviner series by her, which is like YA, paranormal, fantasy, spooky, takes place in the 1920s, has a great cast of characters. I love it. I also really recommend the audiobooks of the series. They are quite long because these books are chunky, but they're really good audiobooks. I'm so excited to finish the next book in the series. I think so far this is my favorite. I know it's only between 2 books, but this might still be my favorite after I finish the 3rd one. I don't know. The next books that I read all on audio, and that was Crazy Rich Asians, China Rich Girlfriend, and Rich People Problems by Kevin Kwan. I think a lot of people have heard of these books because the first book got adapted into a movie. I haven't seen that yet, These books are about some extremely rich Chinese families and some of the wild things that they get up to. In the first book, one of the characters, Nicholas Young, brings his American girlfriend to meet his family for the first time, and they didn't really know about her, and she also had no idea how rich his family was. I read all of these on audio and they were very entertaining and quick to read, but I did have one problem with all of them, and that's that the author had some characters say some kind of disparaging and problematic things that included slurs, and you weren't supposed to like the character or characters. I don't remember now how many people said these things. You weren't supposed to like the character who said these things, but the author wrote out the slurs at points, and I didn't really appreciate that, especially when the author isn't part of the group that slur is used against. I don't think he should be using them in the book, even if it's to depict a character saying something. I feel like you could just say, this character said a slur that means this, or something like that. Like, he didn't have to write out the slurs. So I really didn't like that at all. And I gave all of these 3 stars. The next thing that I read was the Adventure Zone Petals to the Metal, which is the 3rd Adventure Zone graphic novel. I've talked about the first 2 previously. I love the Adventure Zone graphic novels so much. I love the Adventure Zone podcast so much. Everyone should go listen to the podcast and then read these graphic novels. It's Dungeons & Dragons greatness, and I love it so much. It's such good storytelling. I'm especially so excited for the books coming out after this, because those arcs of the podcast are really when I felt like the writing and storytelling got a lot better, and it's so good. Petals to the Metal, I think, is the hardest storyline to follow in the podcast, in my opinion, so I really liked seeing it in graphic novel form and getting to experience it in a different type of media. Actually, especially because the graphic novels streamline the plot a little bit and have it easier to follow. It does cut some things out that I really enjoy, but it adds more foreshadowing and character stuff early on, so I love it so much. Also, this one has sapphic side characters. I love them so much. I love this, and if you've listened to the Adventure Zone or know anything about it or D&D, please talk to me about it. And I gave this 4 stars. The next thing that I read was Let Me Hear a Rhyme by Tiffany D. Jackson, who is the author of Monday's Not Coming. And RC and I loved that so much, we decided to buddy read Let Me Hear a Rhyme, which I listened to on audio. It was another great audiobook, and I did really enjoy this book, but I didn't enjoy it quite as much as Monday's Not Coming. This book follows a girl named Jasmine whose brother Steph has recently died, and the other 2 point of view characters are her brother's friends, Quadir and Gerald. The 3 of them end up coming up with a plot and working together to publish a rap album of Steph's and pretend that he's still alive but try to get it published. And Jasmine's also trying to find out the truth behind her brother's murder. The next book that I read was We Set the Dark on Fire by Taylor K. Mejia. This is a sapphic YA dystopian fantasy that follows a girl named Daniela Vargas who goes to an elite school called the Medio School for Girls, where girls are trained for one of 2 roles. In this society, elite men have 2 wives, and these are the Primera and the Segunda. They have different roles. The Primera is more in charge of the household, while the Segunda is more in charge of the family and having children, and Daniela is training to be a Primera. However, Dani has a secret, and that is that she has forged papers who let her into the school. She is actually lower class in society than everyone else realizes, and she has these forged papers that let her go to the school so she could rise above and succeed in life. Near the beginning of the book, she is asked to spy on the family that she is going to be a part of by the resistance who are fighting against the elite. I enjoyed reading this, and for the first half of the book I thought it was more of a 4-star read, but unfortunately it started to fall flat for me, especially with her being part of the resistance plotline, because a lot of the times that she found out information, it was through like her overhearing random conversations just conveniently, and it wasn't through her really trying to do things or trying to find out information. There were times she definitely did go in search of information, but there were just 1 too many times that she conveniently overheard conversations. One thing I really did like was the sapphic romance. There's so much good tension, and it made me do the side eyes emoji, I did enjoy this, and I am interested to see where this goes from here. There's a second book, and it follows the other girl, and I'm kind of interested to see her point of view and see if I like that book better. So I am going to continue on with the series. If you want a dystopian sapphic romance by an author of color, I definitely recommend this book. The next thing I read is Don't You Cry by Mary Kubecka, and this might be the first adult thriller I've read. I may have read another one. It's definitely one of the first. I don't really read thriller, but it's something that I want to try, and so I decided to give this book a try. I read it on audio. It was definitely interesting, but not amazing. I might not have finished it if I had been reading it physically, but because I was reading it on audio, I found it easier to get through. There's two perspectives. A girl named Quinn whose roommate disappears, and a boy named Alex who works in a small town and becomes interested in a mysterious woman that he meets in the coffee shop that he works in. Some of the twists were interesting, and I didn't see all of them coming, but unfortunately I wasn't really compelled by the characters and just wasn't really connected to the book. So I ended up giving this 3 stars. 3 stars for me is sometimes a really good rating, and sometimes it just means the book was kind of it really depends. But I am really looking forward to trying more thrillers in the future, so if you have any thriller recommendations, let me know. I know I want to try to read Lock Every Door by Riley Sager, and I want to try to read Home Before Dark also by Riley Sager if I like Lock Every Door, and I want to try to read, what's that Ruth Ware book? The House Without a Key? Something like that? Something about a house. I want to read those two, but if you have any other thriller recommendations, let me know. The next book that I read was The Stars and the Blackness Between Them by Junauda Petrus, and this was the July pick for the Bibliophiles book club that I'm a member of, so I will link our live stream for that down below, and I think it was hosted on my channel, so I'll also put it in a card up above. This is a sapphic contemporary about 2 girls, Mabel, who lives in the US, and Audrey, who lives in Trinidad but is sent to live with her dad in the US after her mother finds out about the secret romance that she's a part of. One big aspect of this book, other than Mabel and Audrey's relationship, is an illness that Mabel had, so definitely if that's a topic that can be hard for you, know that going into the book. There were so many chef's kiss sapphic quotes. I won't share all of them here because you should experience them for yourselves, but also we shared a bunch of those on the Bibliophiles live show, so go check that out. This book, it's so good. There's so much good sapphic energy, so much good sapphicness. So good. It made me cry. Please read it. I gave it 5 stars. The next book that I read was Mortal Heart by Robin Lefevers, and this was also a reread that I did via audio. This is the 3rd book in the His Fair Assassin trilogy by her. This series is all about different girls who are raised at a convent where they serve the god of death and train to be assassins. It's historical fiction, there's some fantasy elements, there's romance, there's political intrigue. I really enjoyed these books. And I was rereading these because I then wanted to reread Courting Darkness, which is a spin-off duology, because the second book, Igniting Darkness I think is what it's called, just came out, and I'm looking forward to reading that. The next book that I read was another nonfiction that I read via audio, and that was How to Be an Antiracist by Ibram X. Kendi. This is a nonfiction book about racial justice in America and what it means to be and how to be an anti-racist. I thought this book was important and educational, and I'll probably revisit it in the future. I didn't give this a star rating because of what I mentioned before with my nonfiction reads and star ratings. Also, I'm sorry if there are slight camera angle issues. If you watched my last video, you know that I have a makeshift tripod for my phone that failed and fell apart and broke. And I made another one, but it's not being quite as successful as I hoped, so I may have to make another makeshift tripod. These makeshift tripods are literally cardboard and duct tape, so if anyone has any better ideas that are not buying a tripod, let me know. The next thing that I read was a graphic novel, and that was Slam Volume 1. This is by Pamela Ribon with illustrations by Veronica Fish. This is an entertaining graphic novel about roller derby and the friendship between the 2 main characters, Jennifer and Maisie. There are definitely ups and downs to their friendship, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in the next graphic novel in the series. I will say I did want a bit more queer rep, especially because this graphic novel focuses on roller derby, which is such a queer sport. support. There were some queer characters drawn in the background, but I'm kind of hoping at least one of the main characters will be queer, or that there will be some important side characters that are queer in the second graphic novel, but I haven't read that yet, so I'm not sure. I did enjoy this and I gave it 3 stars. And now we are finally to the last book that I read in the month of July, and that was The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. This is a adult historical, like, literary fiction type book, and I read this via audiobook, and I did enjoy the audiobook. This is about 2 twin sisters who grew up in the same small town black community where lighter skin is really encouraged, and both of them run away and want to get away from this community. And they run away as teens, and the book kind of follows what happens to them and also what happens in the next generation to their daughters and where their daughters end up. I'd say this book was maybe a little bit slow, but I'm glad I read it via audio because that kept me more engaged, and it dealt with issues of race, class, and gender, and I really liked all of those explorations. I think similar to nonfiction, reading literary fiction via audio might be the way to go for me, and I gave this 4 stars. Alright, those are all of the books that I read in the month of July. Thank you so much for watching, especially because if you're watching this, you watched my July wrap-up in September, and I appreciate it because I'm very behind and I will still need to film my August wrap-up. Though I will be getting that up in September, the August wrap-up will not be going up in October. I am saying that right now. I will get it up in September. I'm speaking it into existence. If you've read any of these, let me know what you thought in the comments, or also if you're now interested in any of these because I talked about them. If you don't have anything to say about these books, you can just leave me a little emoji in the comments down below. If you're interested in any more of my videos, you can hit the subscribe button and also click the like button on this video. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you later. This was 5 stars. It's so good. Oh, I'm dropping my iPad. Ooh. This girl follows, and I've also heard was I even looking at the camera this whole time? Excuse me.